Hello and welcome to Digital Academy. This is the Digital Academy Night Edition. This video is going to be a little bit longer. So you might want to watch a different one if you only have a few minutes. This one's probably going to be about a half hour. So grab a coffee or your beverage of choice and throw on some headphones. And we're about to spend some time learning about ancient Carthage. Okay, so in like high school history classes or in books you've read, you may have heard Carthage presented as kind of, I don't know why I'm whispering, just maybe because Evie's and Julie are sleeping, but Carthage is often presented as kind of the enemy of Rome, right? They're the group that Rome is fighting in the Punic Wars. So yeah, let's jump into this. I saw the first few minutes of this. It looked awesome. But kept cutting out because I was using Screencastify, and I think the video was, I don't know, whatever, Screencastify was struggling with the quality of it. So anyways, I forgot. I was like, why am I not using just straight in PowerPoint? Let's do this old school style, but the recorder in this is sweet. So, all right, anyways, enough chitter chatter. Let's go to the next slide and start the video. Cheers, Digital Academy. Love you guys, let's do it.
Today, Carthage is remembered only in the context of its dramatic fall. It is the historical Goliath slain by Rome with little attention spared on its backstory. The reason is quite simple. The Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage were an epic, century-long clash of civilizations whose final chapter concluded with the utter destruction of the North African Empire. History was written by the victor, and the memory of Carthage was left to the ashes. This has tragically left us with only fragmentary information about a fascinating civilization which lasted over 7 centuries and which at one point ruled over much of the Western Mediterranean. Today, it will be our goal to draw back the shrouded veils of history and bring to life the rise of Carthage. But what if Carthage had not been destroyed in the Punic Wars? Luckily, you can change history today by leading Hannibal to defeat Rome through our sponsor, Rise of Kingdoms. It's a free RTS mobile game that allows you to pick from 11 historical kingdoms, each with their own unique bonuses, architecture, and units led by legendary commanders like Hannibal and Scipio. Compete with players on a shared map to build cities, form alliances, explore new lands, progress through the...
I was about to complain about that because in-video ads are definitely the worst, but this game actually, man, I would actually probably really enjoy that game. That actually looks like it'd be pretty fun. It's like the game Civilizations.
eras and battles for the realm in
cool
real-time combat. Test your mettle by taking on raid bosses with your favorite hero, or form an alliance of up to 170 players and join the Osiris League special event to fight other teams across an exciting Egypt-themed battleground. Don't miss out on any of the action by using spectator mode to see who will be crowned league champion. The latest patch update introduced massive amounts of exciting content, so support the channel by downloading Rise of Kingdoms and claim these awesome prizes using the link in the description below. Carthage's rise is intimately linked with the history of the Phoenicians. But just who were the Phoenicians? Well, to start with, they were a cultural group which lived in the coastal areas of the Middle East, a region covered today by Lebanon, northern Israel, and western Syria.
Just in case they don't read that, around 1050 BC, a Phoenician alphabet, remember if you took my digital literacy class, we talked about the Phoenician alphabet, became one of the most widely used writing systems spread by merchants across the Mediterranean world, where it evolved and gave rise to the Greek alphabet, which in turn gave rise to Latin.
Here, these ancient Bronze Age people lived in a series of independent city-states, which included the noble settlements of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos. By mastering ocean travel and trade, they managed to link together the far-flung markets of the ancient world and grow wealthy from their profits. Their power only grew as economic activity across the Mediterranean accelerated over the course of the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st millennia BCE. However, in the 1200s BCE, the Bronze Age collapse threatened to bring the whole known world crashing down. Yet the Phoenicians would prove resilient. Amazingly, they weathered the storm and even managed to capitalize on an open market while their land-based rivals withered away. As a result, great cities such as Tyre rose to preeminence. Fueling their growth was a movement to expand on existing trade networks by founding hundreds of outposts and colonies across the Mediterranean. By 800 BCE, there were Phoenician colonies everywhere, from Cyprus and Sicily to Spain and North Africa. In these endeavors, the Phoenicians found fierce competition from their Greek rivals, who were also occupied with colonizing the Mediterranean in places like southern Italy.
See, it's crazy because I've even taught about the Phoenicians and Carthage independently and never made that obvious connection. Man, that has me shaking my head already.
Such colonies could range in size from small trading posts or religious sites to fully fledged cities. Politically, the Phoenician colonies of the Mediterranean were free to govern themselves, although they typically paid homage to their mother cities in various ways. Economically, however, the Phoenician colonies were increasingly being dominated by Tyre, which had grown wealthy from the east-west trade routes across the Mediterranean. In particular, control of the silver trade coming from Spain made it one of the most formidable cities of its time. Carthage was born out of the flourishing Phoenician trade network. In fact, its founding in modern-day Tunisia strategically positioned the colony to take advantage of both the east-west trade route, which ran from Phoenicia to Spain, and the north-south route, which ran from Africa to Italy. Geographically speaking, the city itself was ideally located at the tip of a peninsula with both natural protection and close access to the sea. According to tradition, we are told that Carthage was founded in about 814 BCE, a date which generally coincides with archaeological findings. The foundation myth tells of Dido, a princess who had fled Tyre. She was escaping her brother Pygmalion, who had just murdered Dido's husband, the high priest of Tyre, and seized power in the city. As she fled, Dido brought with her not only colonists, but the customs of Tyre and the Phoenicians as well. When she landed in North Africa, Dido supposedly resorted to clever trickery to establish her new home. After being told she could settle her people on only the land that an ox hide could cover, Dido ingeniously cut the hide into strips and seized an area big enough to found a city. This settlement she named Carthage, a simple name that means new city in Phoenician. Thus, Carthage was born. Historically speaking, Carthage likely began as a small trade settlement, which, in its very early stages, was subordinate to the locals, being forced to pay rent for the use of the land. This idea of a humble colony at the mercy of its neighbors is reflected in legend as well. Supposedly, Dido killed herself by jumping into a fire in order to avoid a forced marriage to one of the native chiefs. But it wasn't just the locals that overshadowed young Carthage. There were other, elder Phoenician cities in the region, like Utica and Hippoacra, which may have exercised some degree of control over their younger sibling. Yet, despite its...
Sorry, I'm being really slow with the cursor because if I click outside the box at all, it flips to the next slide and it cuts the recording. So, Utica is considered the first Phoenician colony to have been founded in North Africa. Several classical authors date its foundation to around 1100 BC. The archaeological evidence, however, suggests foundation no earlier than the 8th century. No later than.
infancy, the new city appears to have grown quite rapidly. Within a century, it reached a population of 30,000 people, with bustling economic activity, rapid city development, and a new set of walls. This trend would accelerate in the years that followed. However, the true turning point for Carthage would come with the decline of its mother city. In 586 BCE, Tyre came under siege by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II. The siege must have been exhausting for Tyre, as it lasted for 13 years. Ultimately, Tyre was able to beat back the Babylonians, but not without cost. For 13 years, Tyre had seen itself cut off from its colonies. Permanent damage to Tyre's position was done. To make matters worse, the silver trade had begun to collapse, which had ripple effects for both Tyre and the Phoenicians in Spain. By the time Cyrus of Persia finally conquered the Phoenicians in 539 BCE, the once great cities had already witnessed a half-century of decline. Without Tyre and the other eastern Phoenician states, the colonies in the west suddenly found themselves facing a power vacuum. For Carthage, there could not have been a better situation. Carthage first began its rise locally. By the 5th century BCE...
Just a quick point, guys. In some of the other videos I've mentioned Carthage and that I wanted to say more about Carthage. In this video that, I told you I had tried it a couple times with Screencastify and only got to a couple minutes in, but this is obviously big time interesting, so I'm not gonna pause much more. I'll just let this play out more than normal, just because, man, it's like we're watching a high quality old school Discovery Channel when they still made documentaries like this. Before it was all just The Curse of Oak Island or whatever they have on now. Not that that's not interesting. That's an interesting thing too. But anyways.
The upstart city was able to shake off the yoke of the native Libyans and quickly became the leading regional power with great influence over Utica, Hippo Acre, and other Phoenician settlements of North Africa. From here, the new city then began to look out across the Mediterranean, intent on claiming Tyre's old throne. Yet, whereas Tyre had dominated the colonies almost solely through economic pressure, Carthage began adding military force into the mix. Her navy became formidable and feared, and her army began seeing deployment in foreign lands. In these ways, Carthage established a new model of hegemony, which more closely resembled that of a traditional empire compared to the previous system under Tyre. As Carthage's sphere of influence grew, so too did her cultural dominance. Local groups were increasingly absorbed within its cities and territories, while the Punic language spread as the primary Phoenician dialect across the empire. But this new system was still not one of complete domination. In fact, compared to most other empires throughout history, it was actually very hands-off. For example, only the immediate hinterlands of the city were governed by the Carthaginians themselves, while the rest of the empire was controlled by means of treaties. Generally speaking, these required the following from their subjects. 1. Tributary obligations, often in the forms of money and manpower. 2. Diplomatic concessions, such as aligning with Carthage's list of friends and enemies. 3. Special war duties such as troop garrisons and supply requisitions. Apart from these restrictions, though, cities in treaties with Carthage...
Yeah, we're cool as long as you pay us tax, do all these rules that you don't want to do but that benefit us, and also send us soldiers when we're fighting. It's a hilarious, not hilarious, but...
Carthage governed themselves and kept the rest of their freedoms. After all, Carthage's primary goal was to keep the wealth flowing rather than meddling in low-level internal politics. This new empire was not afraid to flex its muscles, and Carthaginian expansion in the following centuries was both fast and forceful. Around 600 BCE, the Carthaginians occupied Ebussus in a move to dominate nearest Spain, while at the same time seeking to project power into the seas around southern France. In the following century, the Carthaginians found themselves fighting wars in Africa, Sicily and Sardinia under the semi-mythical general Malchus. His successor Margo I then kicked off the long rule of the Marganid clan, which would dominate Carthage politically for roughly 180 years. Under their reign, the military power of Carthage grew even further, with a greater emphasis placed on the deployment of powerful armies and fleets across the Mediterranean. By 500 BCE, these were used to dominate North Africa, southern Spain, and a host of Mediterranean islands, including Sardinia and western Sicily. This last region would become the bane of Carthage. Over the next 300 years, 11 wars would be fought across its rugged lands, and it would be here that the spark was ultimately lit for the Punic Wars, which brought about the fall of Carthage. But that story...
Right, here's where they run head into head with the Romans.
We'll have to wait for another time.
That's a whole other story.
Now that we have traced the broad trajectory of Carthage's rise to power, let us take a closer look at its civilization. We will do so in the following order: government, economy, culture, and military.
How cool is this video?
Initially, Carthage's government had been ruled as a monarchy whilst under Tyre. Upon gaining its independence, however, it adopted a new constitution which established an oligarchic republic. This involved two annually elected heads of state called suffets. They presided over a senate of 200 to 300 members, which together proposed legislation and conducted diplomacy. Below them was a popular assembly made up of Carthaginian citizens, which elected magistrates and voted on policy decisions. At various levels of government would be other bodies which handled all sorts of administrative duties.
Committees.
A particularly important body was the Court of 104, which provided oversight on military commanders. Such a system was incredibly sophisticated for its time, and several ancient writers remarked on its robust nature. The Carthaginian economy was incredibly diverse, with a large amount of domestic production and trade. For example, advanced agriculture and fishing ensured that huge amounts of food could be harvested from the fertile lands and coasts of North Africa, while all sorts of other raw materials like timber, skins, salts, and metals were extracted from across the empire. These might then be processed and manufactured into more desirable products or luxury goods such as garum, colourful dyes, or jewellery. From here, they could then be shipped along the vast Carthaginian trade network for sale and exchange across the Mediterranean. The Punic state even took an interest in establishing new trade routes that the known world had never seen. Just to give you a sense of the scale involved here, we have records of Punic traders in places like West Africa,
all Europe.
Spain,
Africa.
France, England, Italy, Greece, Egypt, Persia, and more.
I don't know if you saw
This was all
cursor
facilitated by massive merchant fleets, commercial harbours, and intrepid explorers. Suffice to say, Carthage was an impressive economic powerhouse and jewel of antiquity. The Carthaginian culture was also a source of great richness. At its heart were the Phoenician influences planted with the colony and renewed over the centuries by a close connection to Tyre. Perhaps the most obvious manifestation of this was the religion of Carthage. This was the polytheistic belief system with a wide pantheon of gods. Chief amongst them were Baal, Melkart, and Tanit. Each deity had their own temples, which were frequently masterpieces of engineering and beauty. These would have existed side by side with other proud edifices of Carthaginian culture. Massive twin harbours, vast markets, artisan districts, gridded neighbourhoods, 6-storey apartments, marbled public buildings, palatial gardens, fountains, statues, and all kinds of other structures. Filling the city would have been subjects and visitors from all parts of the globe. They brought with them their language, their clothing, their food, and their customs. Though few records remain, one can just imagine the incredible sights, sounds, and smells to be experienced while walking the streets of Carthage.
Yeah.
And lastly, we must mention the Carthaginian military which protected the empire. Famously, its land forces were composed of only a minority native force which might take the field as a citizen hoplite. Meanwhile, the majority of the troops were actually auxiliary units supplied by tributary subjects, or were specialist mercenary elements drawn from communities across the Mediterranean. Yet,
yeah, that's crazy. They didn't have a huge army. They had a strong army, and then basically just tons of allies, auxiliary, non-primary force.
Another tool in the Punic arsenal would be their feared war elephants, trained locally or imported from abroad. In the hands of a competent general, the flexibility of these forces could prove devastating. But the true might of Carthage lay with its navy. This was amongst the largest and most advanced fleets of its time. Its vessels were produced in state-of-the-art facilities using cutting-edge methods of mass production. The core of the force consisted of squadrons tasked with protecting the merchant fleet, with additional warships being deployed in times of conflict. Such was the scale of Carthage's naval industrial complex that it is reported to have been able to produce over 200 ships in just a few months. These capabilities would be on full display in the climactic engagements of the Punic War.
Oh yeah. That's another
Thus
video.
we have seen that Carthage was far more than the dust and ashes left to us by the history books. It was an impressive marvel of its time, with a stunning complexity that we can only just begin to glimpse. Stay tuned for future videos as we dive deeper into Carthaginian history and the hidden life of their forgotten civilization. Change history by taking the reins of your favorite historical...
Alright, well, we're definitely not watching that ad toys. But man, that channel is pretty impressive. I don't know if you like history. If you don't like ancient history, you're probably not still watching this video because it's at like the 25-minute mark almost. But anyways, I love you guys, and if you guys like ancient history, that was pretty cool. All right, keep your head up. Have a good day. Love you. Cheers.